became a Muslim. No, when I became a Muslim, I hardly had to tell anybody. Strange thing happened. I was working at a Catholic university, Christian university, run by the Society of Jesus. And I was an atheist at the time, but I didn't tell them. Just wanted the job. Well, and I have a Catholic name and Catholic background, so, let them assume what they will. I got the job. Well, I was not on the job but 3 months at the University of San Francisco, and I became a Muslim. And there were only 2 or 3 people in the mosque that day, well, about 4. That day I became a Muslim, a student-run masjid, so I didn't assume that the news would travel very fast or far. Well, the next day I'm walking on campus, and all these Muslim students are coming up to me saying, are you the professor who became a Muslim? And I'm looking around and thinking, are they going to kill me or what? I looked at them, yes. And then a big smile would come on their face, and they'd say, congratulations, congratulations, all day long, congratulations, congratulations, everywhere I'd go, congratulations. Muslim students would walk by me, Middle Eastern-looking students would just walk by me, smile, and say, congratulations. So I started to get nervous. And I swear, if I walked into class and a professor said, congratulations, I was going to really get scared. But in any case, it didn't quite work out that way. With all this news among the Muslim community, that very same day, one of the professors on campus found out that I had become a Muslim. And he was another professor. Was hired a tenure-track job. He was just hired as a temporary, but he thought if I got fired, he could get my job. So he went around the entire campus telling the administration, every professor he saw, every secretary, any person he could run into, that Jeff Lang became a Muslim. And no sooner than that, this was from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, I had professors walking by me saying, is it true? Did you become a Muslim? So my start in Islam was, I didn't have to tell anybody anything. Within a couple of weeks, I was probably the most famous Muslim in San Francisco. Believe me, I didn't want to be. I just wanted to just relax somewhere, just be like everybody else. But I was immediately in the spotlight. So I didn't have to tell anybody. I had to sort of defend the decision I made right from the start. But my reasons for becoming a Muslim were essentially this. I was an atheist with very strong objections to the idea of God. Very strong rational objections. At least I thought I had. Through the process of reading the Quran, not only did I find a solution to those objections, but I discovered God in the process. And I became a Muslim. So it was easy for me to defend my choice. I told them I was not, as an atheist for these reasons. I became a Muslim because these were the answers I got from my religion. And they would just stand there and say, not bad. Makes sense. If I ever become a religious person someday, I'll think about it. So I had no difficulty defending what I had done. So right from the moment I became a Muslim, I was put in a position of having to defend myself. The only difficulty I really had was telling my mother that I had become a Muslim, because she was a very devout Christian. And then I became an atheist. That was a big shock in her life. But when I became a Muslim, that was even worse as far as she was concerned. And I had a difficult time telling her. A couple days after I became a Muslim, I called her on the phone. And she was the first person that I personally notified about what I had done. And it was a very emotionally charged 3 weeks, that semester break, when I went home and had to defend what I had done to my parents. Because I had to explain Islam to them from A to Z. And we were up till 5 in the morning every night, my mother and I, discussing religion for like 2 weeks straight, exhausting each other. But in the end, she came to have a healthy respect for my religion. At one point she said, I understand why you became a Muslim. A person who thinks the way you do, I wasn't quite sure what that meant, but a person who thinks the way you do, I can understand why that religion would definitely appeal to them. And then she said to me, but I'm sorry, son, but I can never become a Muslim. And I told her I never even suggested the idea. And After that, we agreed to discuss it for a long time, and we did. But finally, she asked me at one stage not to discuss it anymore. And so we just hardly ever discuss it anymore. Unless she brings it up, then I'll discuss it with her. But I'll never bring it up first, because she immediately becomes defensive and has a very difficult time on it. So thank you.
Okay, Michelle, the next question is, when people tell you I want to learn about Islam, but because of my studies, or at that moment cannot find time, how should we respond? Is it because of their fear, or can they truly not find the time? I don't understand.
So they say they want to learn about Islam, but they said they don't have the time?
They say like they have studies, but they can't find the time to pray,
Oh.
So they want to know what they should do.
So they want to learn, but they can't find the time.
Right. Or it could be they miss their prayers because they have too much study.
Oh. Well, I don't know. If you're talking about a non-Muslim who says he's interested in learning about Islam, but this is not a good time for him, I always say to people, well, I mean, it's your choice. I'm not going to ram my religion down your throat, and I never will. But I tell them that I think that I'll usually reinforce them. I'll tell them that the search for truth and the search for a relationship with God is very important. I don't see how it could be more important than anything else in the world. And I usually tell them to start learning about Islam, you don't have to look very far. All you have to do is pick up a pretty good interpretation of the Quran in English and just read a few pages a night. It takes 4 or 5 minutes. I said it's really no great commitment of time. In no time at all, I told them. By the time you finish even the second surah of the Quran, you'll have a pretty good summary knowledge of Islam.
What happens when you read the first time?
Oh, well, that's sort of how, and the reason why I said that is that's how I sort of started. I had received a copy of the Quran from some friends, and I decided I would just read a few pages a night just to get an idea. And I read the opening surah of the Quran. When I got done, it dawned on me that I had just read a prayer for guidance. And I felt like I was almost tricked into it. Because I got to the end and I said, hey, I just read a prayer for guidance. I'm not a Muslim. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. I just read a prayer for guidance. So you can imagine my reaction when I went on to the next page, which began the second surah of the Quran, entitled The Cow, and it began Aleph, Lam, Mim. That is the book wherein, no doubt, is guidance for those who have fear, have taqwa. I was shocked. It was just a voice from heaven was calling down to me. I had no sooner just prayed for guidance, semi-consciously, and now the next surah was answering my prayer. That. They translated it this, but this author happened to translate it as that, and I'm glad he did, because that's the literal translation. That. What? That. This? This book? That book. What book? This book? That book is the book wherein, no doubt, is guidance for those who have fear, who have taqwa, religious consciousness. I was stunned. And so as I read through the Quran, I was intrigued immediately. What does it say? So I started reading through the Quran. And in the beginning it describes the people who will be guided by this revelation. It's as if it was written for a non-believer. I'm only surprised when Muslims think that it's read for believers and you shouldn't share it with non-believers. Its principal audience originally were mostly non-believers. They're the ones that heard it. When I read it, I felt it was definitely read for a non-believer. I'm not saying it's written for everyone. It's revealed for everyone. But I could feel it talking to me. It begins by describing its audience. Who will benefit most by this? Who will benefit least by this? Who will be in sort of the middle? Describes the believers and their qualities. 3 or 4 verses. Talks about the people who have a completely closed mind. They won't even consider this. They won't even think about it. They don't want to be bothered. Talks about them in about a line and a half. They won't consider it. No use wasting time on it. Then it talks for about 12 lines, verse 8 through 20 of the second surah, 13 lines about all those people in between. which was me. I may have been an atheist, but I was willing to listen. I may have been an atheist, but I was curious. I wasn't an outright rejecter, just couldn't satisfy my doubts. But here I was, in the middle, and that was me, and I knew it. As you read through that second surah, it summarizes Islam's major themes. And then from there on out, you're sort of hooked. Right? What's your first question? Well, your first question is, what's the purpose of life? Why did God create us? Did he put us here just to punish us? You start reading the second surah, and it begins to answer that question. The angels ask, why create this being who creates suffering and sheds blood? When we celebrate your praises and glorify your holy name. You know what reaction was when I read that? Wait a minute, that's my question. Why put us here on earth to suffer? Why make this creature who could commit terrible wrongs and put him in this environment where he could exercise his most negative and destructive tendencies? Why didn't you make us angels and just put us up into heaven if it was within your power? That was my question. I had asked it of priests, I had asked it of rabbis, I had asked it of Buddhist monks, I had asked it of Hindus, I had asked it of Hare Krishnas on campus, I had asked it of everybody. Everybody said, I don't know. Just got to have faith. Here I was, not but several lines into the Quran, verse 30 of the second surah, and my question is put there in the mouth of the angels. Slowly but surely the Quran begins to unravel and answer. And as it does, it takes you through so many different facets and angles of life. It interjects different parts of its message as it lures you into its design. And so as I read the Quran and proceeded along, I was trapped. It was written. I felt it was written perfectly for a non-believer. And so I would very much encourage you, if you have somebody, and he is honestly interested in Islam, but feels he doesn't have the time, point him in the direction of the Quran. A good interpretation, one that you found that you trust in English, and get him in that direction. Nothing is more powerful in showing people the way to Islam than the Quran.
Jazakallah khair. Next question is pretty brief. It says, the speech you just gave was taken from your latest book. If so, when will it be published?
I don't know. You have to talk to Amana Publishers. No, I am right now on page 170 on my computer. I'm just finishing the fourth chapter. It's called The Pillars of Islam. I have 2 more chapters to write. They're sort of brief. One is about the trials and tribulations a typical Muslim convert faces when they enter the Muslim community. The things I think that we Muslims do to dissuade people from staying in the community. And the positive things we do that I think help people to find comfort and peace within that community. So I discuss the Muslim community. And then in the the last chapter, very briefly, I discuss my hopes and dreams for my children as Muslims in America, and my hopes for the future of Muslims in America, and the problems I think they'll have to face. So I think I have about 40 pages left. So it should be about 210 pages long. Sorry I have to talk about it in these terms, but I'm envisioning it as my head in the typewriter as I'm talking to you. Yeah, mathematician. 40 pages usually takes me about 40 days to write. So I think in about 2 months I'll be done, and I'll send it off to the publishers, and they'll start editing it, and we'll start communicating back and forth. Maybe about 1.5 years from now. Well, it takes time. Then they got to print it, they got to manufacture it, they got to publish it. Once I send it to them, it's out of my hands, though. I have nothing to do with it except for checking. Okay, sorry.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. The next question is regarding prayer. If you guys could keep the question topics about prayer, that would be very helpful because we have so many questions. The question says, how do you put all your concentration into your prayers?
Well, you do the best you can. When I'm praying, and I think you probably found this useful as well, when you pray, it's very difficult, to have total concentration during your prayer. But I think it's good that while you're performing your prayer, to interrupt yourself at times and think about, genuinely think about, something that you're grateful to Allah for. Think about a deep concern you have for someone close to you, and you communicate that to Allah during your prayer. Think about something that you feel you may not have done quite right, a doubt you have about yourself, and ask God to forgive you for that and to help you with that. Most importantly, try to adopt an attitude of humility during your prayer. I think, this is just my personal advice, the more humble, sincerely humble you are in your prayer, the more when you turn to prayer, you acknowledge and admit to Allah your dependence upon Him. The more you turn your heart totally over to Him and concentrate on that, the more you try to envision His greatness compared to your smallness, His kindness compared to your humanity, the more you concentrate on His beautiful attributes, most powerful names, I find the more beautiful is the experience of your prayer. So as you recite the Quran, interrupt yourself at stages. Just don't recite your prayer as a formula. Stop yourself at moments. And whenever you feel so during your prayer, stop yourself at a verse and communicate to Allah your deepest feelings about Him. And be thankful for what He has given you. And ask for His help, sincerely, from the depths of your heart. And tell Him, although He already knows how much you need Him and you want to grow near to Him. Because when you do that, you are opening your heart to His light. And like I said, those most beautiful moments almost never come as when anticipated. Sometimes they come and you're not even trying. Or you're just standing there in your prayer and you're reciting Al-Fatiha, and all of a sudden you'll feel this beauty take over you. But still, I think it's the attitude with which you approach that prayer. If you approach it just as a burden that you want to get out of the way, then it's probably going to be a burden that you just get out of the way. And you will receive a reward for it, because it will develop your steadfastness, persistence, etc. But if you approach it as a humble servant of God Almighty, as one who depends on Him totally, that has total trust in Him, I think it'll enhance the beauty of your prayer all the more. And God knows best. But I will say this. To all of us, we need to remember this. And we have to remind ourselves of this. Don't miss the prayers. Don't skip the prayers. Skip the prayers, you're taking a step backwards. And then you have a difficult time getting back to where you were before. Pray day in, day out, as prescribed, and you will slowly but surely notice a progress in your spirituality. You will notice that the beauty of the prayers increases with that performance in prayer. You will notice that if you compare your experience of prayer to the way it was 3 years ago, there is something greater about it now than it was then. Provided that you're also trying to live the life of a Muslim, sincerely trying to be humble and compassionate to others, to be truthful, to be fair to your neighbor, to be just, to be honest, etc., etc. But most of all, with all that, don't miss a prayer. Because you take a huge step backwards. And you got to start again. I'm not saying you go back to step one. Frankly, I don't know. But you do go back. And you got to bring yourself forward again. At least as I perceive it.
Jazakallah khair. There's one question that asked about which translation of the Quran do you think was more beneficial for non-Muslims?
Well, depends on the non-Muslim. The one that moved me the most, strangely enough, was one that, and I'm not recommending it, I'm just saying for me personally, was one that came with no commentary and was done by a non-Muslim. His name was Arthur Arbery, and the English professor, an English professor, but he wasn't a professor of English. He was an Englishman, a professor, scholar of Arabic, who worked I forget the university, Oxford, or I'm not quite sure, in England. And he did this translation, and that was the first one I stumbled on, his interpretation. And it moved me great. After that, I stumbled on, what's his name, Dawood? No, not Yusuf Ali. Marmaduke Pickthall. And I found his very enlightening. Also, I liked the fact that he didn't provide so much commentary. For somehow that was a distraction for me in the beginning. After that, I read Yusuf Ali's. I found it enjoyable. I found that I got things out of it I didn't get out of others. I didn't agree with him on all the points. He's exercising his opinion very frequently. But still, I found it valuable. But you have to realize that these are men, and they are providing their opinions on so many things. They don't tend to be perfect. After that, I read Muhammad Asad. He had some interesting ideas in it. I found some of the things he said very enlightening. I took some, I discarded others. After that, I read Muhammad Ali's. It seemed that he was one of the earliest interpreters of the Quran into English. He did a fairly good job. I had a lot of respect for that interpretation. Let's see, who else did I read? I read, who? Yeah, Hamid Assad. I read, lots of people. I just read about everyone I could find. Recently, I've read the one that the Saudi Arabian Organization for the Propagation of Islam put out. I like that very much. That one I think is very nice. Almost any of those are suitable. Pardon? T.B. Irving. T.B. Irving did a very nice job. I like that. He did it for people who don't like Shakespearean English. For some reason, most Muslim interpreters inevitably use Shakespearean English. I don't know why. A lot of people have difficulty with it. I happen to like Shakespeare, so I enjoyed it. But T.B. Irving, a lot of people prefer his work. I would suggest that you use the interpretation of a sincere Muslim, because that sincerity will show forth. The intensity of his faith will also come out in his work, and that I think will be very inspiring and helpful as well. Any other questions?
Okay, Jazakallah khair. A large portion of these questions are about the atheist, and what would you tell an atheist that would spark interest in Islam, or how would you discuss Islam with them or prove the existence of God to them?
I don't really try to prove the existence of God to an atheist. An atheist doesn't really come at you and says, prove God exists to me. Most people don't expect that much. Most atheists believed in God at one point in their life, and because of various rational or emotional things, rejected that belief at one stage. So they have the seed of belief in them at one stage in their life, but because of a bitter experience within the religion of their birth, they reject religion altogether. So usually I wouldn't suggest for you to come to an atheist and say, I'm going to prove the existence of God. If there were an empirical proof of God, a proof that we could use simply with the five senses, that would be convincing to everyone, no matter what, then everybody on earth would automatically believe. But there is no such simply and purely empirical proof. And I've studied them all. I've even studied the ones by Ibn Sina and others. And you'll have to make certain very strong assumptions for them to work, those arguments. And an atheist might not accept those assumptions. What I am saying is this, that with an atheist, you're taking the wrong approach if you say, I am going to prove to you that God exists. Because you get in a circle. Let him start. His starting position is this, that I have reasons why I do not believe in God. And then he'll start to explain them to you. I don't believe in God because I can't explain the suffering, and this is why we're here to suffer. I don't believe in God because if there's a God, can he make a rock that's too heavy for himself to lift? Let's say goofy things sometimes. If God is omnipotent, can he kill himself? And things like that. Or I don't believe in God because he could have made us angels to start with, and he made us men, inferior. I don't believe in God because this world is imperfect. And a perfect God, if he creates an imperfect world, means he's somewhat imperfect. So he'll start giving you various arguments that he's invented over the years for why there is not a God. And then, if you study the Quran carefully and study your faith carefully, I think you'll begin to point him in the right direction. I'm not saying you'll be able to answer all those questions for him, but you should think about what the Quran says about those issues and say, oh, you know, the Quran says this, and the Quran does talk about that. I personally don't quite understand it, but I know that there are atheists who converted to Islam who found their answers in the Quran. I know this one in particular. This blonde guy, professor from the University of Kansas. He became a Muslim through the Quran, and he was an atheist. You know, and then let him go from there. You know, and he might say, what did he say? What did he do? Do you have a tape? Do you have a light? I wouldn't suggest that I'm the one to do the trick, but I'm just saying. He might say, you know, he might get something out of seeing what another atheist went through. But most importantly, get him in the right direction. You know? But don't come into him, walk up to him like you have a suit of armor on and say, I am going to prove to you that there is a God. No. No. Say, I believe in God very much, and because of my religion, I do this and I do that. And he or she will say, well, I respect your faith, but I personally don't believe in God. And these are the reasons why. And then you can get into a good discussion. Shoot. Please. She is a Muslim. I met her through Muslim families in San Francisco. And I went about it in sort of the semi-traditional way. You know, they had me over for dinner. They had me over for outings and picnics and stuff like that. They realized I was an Amerika, and, you know. Most of the families that introduced me to their daughters or aunts or relatives, they were a little bit flexible with me. I mean, they allowed me some. Maybe I noticed that among Arabs, they're very strict with each other. You know, decide right now. Sorry, you had 30 seconds. You know, with me, they allowed me many, many visits and lots of discussion, and telephone conversations, and dinners. Lots of dinners. Food was very good. I gained about 15 pounds looking for a wife.
Okay,
now we have 3 beautiful children. Okay.
And you missed them very much, right?
Yes, I missed them very much.
Okay, the next, there's a whole bunch of questions that deal with what exactly led you to becoming a Muslim, and have you ever had any second thoughts about any other religions?
After I became a Muslim, or?
After you became a Muslim.
After I became a Muslim, I never had any, I mean, you have to remember, I had so much anger inside me. And so, what I felt were such strong objections to Islam, to religion in general. And I had searched really every other religion, major world religion, before even considering Islam. Because Islam has such a negative reputation in the West that I thought, well, this one, this religion of the terrorists, I definitely don't want to consider. Any religion that fosters terrorism. I don't know why I felt so easily into that prejudice. I know that Western authors could be very prejudiced, but somehow I believed it when they spoke about Islam. Because they were also unanimously prejudiced against, hated it. But in any case, so that was the last one I considered. So I considered others, and then I came up empty. My feelings against religion were so strong. By the time I became a Muslim, began looking into Islam, researching it. I had lost all hope in ever believing in God, really. So you can imagine that after I became a Muslim, there was no real reason to have second thoughts about whether another religion could do the job. First of all, I knew they couldn't because I had already tackled those. And the second thing is that once you felt the power of this religion, it's that power that becomes your confirmation. I mean, suddenly, it's the Quran's rational approach to faith that helped me to become a Muslim. It was the answers it provided to my questions that helped me to become a Muslim. But once you've tasted faith, once you've felt Islam, that becomes your justification. I can't even remember all the rational arguments I had anymore. Because once I felt the power of this religion, they seemed insignificant. I'm not saying they weren't important. They were important. They stood as roadblocks. The Quran smashed those roadblocks. But once it did, and once I felt the beauty and power of this religion, there was no turning back. Why would I want to? Wouldn't make sense. You know, it's as if I was blind and I was looking for something, and people were saying, no, go here and go here and go here. If you go here, you'll get your sight. Another one says, you go here, you get your sight. If you go here, you get your sight. See this doctor, he could get you your sight. Go to this clinic, it'll get you your sight. And you're looking around, and you try one, it doesn't work. You try another, it doesn't work. You look into this, it doesn't work. You don't look into that. And finally, you come to this institution, and you get your sight. Well, after that, you don't need any more proof you're going to get your sight. You've gotten it. I hope I'm making sense. And like my daughter, you're saying, I think so. Okay.
Okay, the next question says, why did Allah make this world if He already knew what would happen?
Yeah, that's always an interesting question. That's like predestination, right? And this is a very ancient question. This is a typically Christian question, also a typically Zoroastrian question. The idea of predestination. If God determines everything in advance, if in the past He determined everything that's going to happen in the future, then what's the purpose of all of this? But I think if we approach this, we have to stick very close to the Quran, that type of question. I'm just going to touch upon it briefly. One thing for sure that the Quran maintains is that God transcends this very space-time environment He has created for us to live in. He is not bound by the limitations of space that this space-time environment, this creation contains, and He is not bound by the limitations of time. The fact that He is infinite in relation to space, we could readily appreciate. None of us in this audience would say that God could possibly be on a bus between Chicago and Toledo at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The reason being because we understand that God transcends space. He is not bound by its limitations. We do not think of God as finite in space. In the same way, we do not think of God as finite in time, like we are. We are bound by the limitations of time. He transcends time. He is outside of time and outside of this space-time environment we live in. He is not limited by it in any way. The reason why I say this is because the question you just posed situates God in time as we are. If you say that, if God in the past knew what was happening in the future, we assume that somehow God is bound in time as we are, and at some point in the past He was looking forward to the future. It situates God in time as we are. But that's an erroneous assumption. That's, I believe, a weak and false assumption, that God is finite in time, that He is sometime in the past looking forward to the future. He transcends time. That's the wrong question. We should say, if God's knowledge encompasses all time and space, this entire space-time creation that we exist in, if all that knowledge is like a single speck for Him, like a moment, a single atom of wisdom, of everything that happens in space and everything that happens in time is encompassed by God's knowledge, then why did He make this happen? Suddenly the question loses its force. He made it happen, even though God controls all, that all space and time is one for Him, that He is not bound by its limitations. That doesn't mean that God does not allow us to make choices, that as far as we're concerned, we progress in space and time. Doesn't negate that at all. So the point I'm trying to make is that the question that you ask makes a false assumption to begin with, that God is limited in time. The notion of qadr, God's infinite power, that God's power encompasses all in space and time, should not be framed as the ancient Greek philosophers framed it. that God is somehow finite in time, looking forward to the future as we humans are. The notion of qadr is that God's power and his knowledge encompasses all. Oops, I got loud. Everything. And as far as we are concerned, we make choices, etc., and he responds to them. But we just should not assume that God is finite in time. We can readily appreciate that God transcends times, because a little bit we have the notion that if we get up really high, transcend means sort of get up high. That's what the root comes from. If we get up high enough, we could see many things happening below at different spaces at once. And so we can somehow appreciate what it means to transcend time. Our knowledge of space. Our knowledge could encompass what's happening at different points in space simultaneously. But God's being also transcends time. This is philosophy. I hope I'm not boring you all to death. But God's knowledge transcends time. So for him, all things that happen, even though they appear at different points in time, are as one. And he is not limited by that in any way, shape, or form. So a Muslim would have no difficulty answering the question. He would just tell the person who asks it that you're asking it in a way that naturally leads to a contradiction, because your question contains a false assumption to begin with. And anytime you begin an argument with a false assumption, you're going to be led to a contradiction. Here's a simple example that's analogous to the question that was just asked me. And I don't blame the person for asking it. It was a beautiful question and an important question. But I know you're all probably thinking, what is he saying? But here's another example of how if you begin a question with a false assumption, with a contradiction, it'll naturally lead to contradictions. Assume a circle is a square. Then I ask you, does a circle have corners? Well, let me see. If I concentrate on the properties of a square, then the answer is yes. But if I concentrate on the roundness of a circle, then the answer is no. Oh my God, I'm led to a contradiction. And then a typical foolish person will then say, oh, well, I don't know what's going on, and get frazzled. What a person should do is go back to the question. Does the assumption make sense? Assume a circle is a square. And similarly, if you begin a question and say, if God in the past predestined the future, go back to the original question. Is God stuck in the past? Is God finite in time? Is he limited by time as we humans are? Does he sit in relation to time as we do? No. And the Quran makes this perfectly clear. A day for God is like 50,000 years of your time. A day for God is like 1,000 years of your time. Showing that time for God is nothing like time for us. The day of judgment. What was this life on earth? I'll say to you, oh boy, I lived 65 years. You'll say, I lived 70 years. How will it appear on the day of judgment when the reality suddenly comes to us? Our notion of time will suddenly seem confused, like it wasn't objectively real. You'll say, let's see, was it an hour? Was it less than that? Was it a day? Was it 10 days? It seemed like suddenly we're confused because time as we perceived it is no longer an objective reality. Finally, when the Quran talks about the day of judgment, it talks about it in the past tense, future tense, I think even the present tense, which shows that this happens in a whole other order of creation that is not limited by our space-time concepts. The long and the short of what I'm trying to say is, be careful when you answer questions. Think about the premises on which those questions are asked. If you seem to be running yourself in circles and contradictions, go back to the premises and analyze them. There may be a contradiction subtly placed there. Sorry about the long discussion, but I have these with my daughter all the time. I really do. And we get into them for hours. Daddy, what does subtly mean? What is it? Sorry about that.
Okay, we had a lot of questions that dealt with hijab, and it asks before you became Muslim, what did you think or what did you feel when you saw Muslim women with hijab, and what do you think about it now?
I can't wear one. I tried. Got people taunted me. I gave it up. No. When I saw Muslims before I became a Muslim, I didn't know who those people were. I frankly thought they were either nuns or Seventh-day Adventists, or I didn't really know. Nowadays, I think people know better. Because back when I became a Muslim, you just didn't see ladies wearing that in America. Nowadays, I think it's clearer to people. Now what do I think when I see them? To be frank, I'm kind of happy. You know, I know it's very difficult for a lot of the sisters. And I realize that a lot of them face tremendous hardship, which we men seem to be completely insensitive about. But most of them face terrible difficulties, tremendous hardship, put up with terrible sacrifices that many of us males would fail to do, wouldn't be strong enough to do. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for the sisters that do. For those that don't or can't or are struggling with it, I understand it's very difficult, and I certainly realize the hardship and the difficulties they're facing. And I could definitely appreciate it, especially here in America. That I understand. But still, when I see, personally, when I see a Muslim sister walking down the street, I feel, and I can identify her as such, it's a very pleasant feeling. And because they are upholding an alternative to the style, to the morals, to the mores, to the direction that the Western culture is pointing women. And I think that takes a tremendous amount of courage, especially when there's such a tiny minority of this society. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for them. The only thing is, I wish when I would pass them on the street and I say, Salaam alaikum, they would respond to me and say, alaikum salam. I don't know if it's because I look very American or what, but they always look at me like, or maybe they just don't like saying hello to fellow Muslims. I don't know. But the Prophet, peace be upon him, used to say Salaam alaikum when he saw the ladies passing on the street, and they would respond, wa alaikum salam. But nowadays, I think some of the sisters get offended when I say that, and I don't understand why. Maybe it's something that a cultural thing, maybe? I don't know. But oh, it's the brothers? They're uptight about it, huh? Probably. Yeah, I find that most of the problems in our community begin with the men, of course. Yes.
Okay, here's an interesting question. It says that I know people who are kind and good and they're not hurting anyone, and they're wondering if they're not fulfilling their Islamic obligations, and they're wondering if is it merely enough to have good character?
Well, let me answer that question in extreme form. The question is, if somebody's kind, good, humanitarian, merciful towards his fellow human beings, helps his friends, his neighbors, is compassionate to others, is he, from the Islamic point of view, going to achieve success in this life and the hereafter? Something to that effect. And let me take the extreme. Let's say the person is an atheist. Well, God knows best. I mean, it depends on what that person knows. It depends on so many things that are beyond my knowledge. How that person will stand on the day of judgment. Maybe no one ever explained to him the truth. Maybe he was incapable of perceiving the truth. Maybe his circumstance, I really don't know. I do know this, that God never holds a person to account for something until that person has had a true warner. But I will say this, that the Quran does not so much deal with these sort of gray cases. It deals with real, practical cases. Because when the Quran approaches the reader, if he's gotten to that stage where he's approaching the Quran, he's ready for the message of that revelation. And once that revelation starts calling to him, it presents things in very stark terms. And the message seems to be essentially this. If you're a good person and you refuse to have a relationship with God, you refuse to even acknowledge God, you refuse to have anything to do with the idea of God, I think generally that person is in a lot of trouble. And the reason why I say this, I'll give you an analogy, because that person is not cultivating the most important relationship in his life. We are here to come to know and grow nearer to God. That person might be a fine human being. He might be a great humanitarian. He might be making himself feel very good inside by everything he does. He might be getting a lot of peace and well-being for it. But the only real relationship that matters, really, in that person's life is not being developed at all. God's love is there for him to turn to. But if he doesn't turn to it, he's never going to receive it. Because love is a two-way street. God's love and mercy is there to shower on all, but you have to enter into that loving relationship with God. You have to turn to him in love. Let me give you the following example. Let's say I have 3 daughters, hypothetically. And let's say one of them, for some reason or another, chooses not to acknowledge that I exist. To such an extent that she never even knows that I exist, never even cares whether I exist, never does anything to even observe the fact that I exist. And so no matter how much love I shower in that daughter's direction, no matter how much mercy I pour on that daughter, no matter how many gifts I bestow on that child, and no matter how good he is or she is to all the other people on this earth, that daughter will never experience my parental love. That daughter will never know my parental mercy and caring. Will never develop a relationship to receive that and experience that. So it'll go throughout life having totally missed that. I see the situation of an atheist who does good deeds towards others and is a great humanitarian in a similar light. No, I am not God to judge that person's ultimate fate. But frankly, if it was my friend and they raised this question with me, I would say that you have something very serious to consider. And I don't have much hope for such a person. You know, life is full of choices. Nobody simply is born to disbelieve in God. Disbelieve in God is a choice, and it is made at a point in a person's life. And we're responsible for the choices we make. And believe me, as an atheist, I'll tell you this. I'm not an atheist anymore, but I was for many years. You were presented many opportunities to think about God. I'll give you one last example. I had a friend, an atheist, very good friend, still a very good friend, colleague as a matter of fact. Came down with cancer, pancreas cancer. They said the cancer was as big as a football almost. The doctors gave her no hope. Went to the hospital. Called from the hospital. Said, I don't know what to do. Would you pray for me? He said, I can't pray for you. I said, of course I could pray for you. But I said, what's the point of me praying for you if you don't pray for you? Nobody could do anything for you unless you want to have it done yourself. Like an alcoholic that has to give up drinking. I can't do it for you. You got to turn yourself. In any case, I don't know what happened, but she said that if I ever get cured from this disease, I will definitely, strongly consider that religion that you adhere to. Lo and behold, they performed the operation, and she's alive today. Now, I'm not saying it was because of that statement of hers. God's mercy encompasses all things, and he does what he wills according to his design. I'm not trying to presume that I know why things turned out the way they did. But I do know this, that today, when I talk about my religion, she mocks it. When I talk about my religion, she says, I don't believe in that. The point is that she has already gone back on her promise to God. She was given the opportunity and the choice, and now she rejects it. And believe me, aside from her obstinate and rebellious rejection of God, she's a nice person to people. She helps neighbors, gives gifts to friends, etc. And she's miserable. And she's miserable because there's something empty and missing in her life. But she was given that choice. And I know, as an atheist, you're given many. God makes them come to you. And so having lived that life, I don't see where many people have an excuse. You know, we have a brain to think with. God gave us hearing, sight, and senses to perceive with. He gave us minds to utilize. And he gives us opportunities to learn. And we either reject them or take them. We're a creature of choice. Any other? I got too long into that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, the next question says, what do you say to an atheist when she asks who created God?
I say no one. No, it's obvious. I just tell them that one of the attributes of God is He is the Creator. If you don't want to accept that, that's up to you. If you don't want to believe that there is a Creator, but we believe that God is the Creator. There's some things that are silly to argue about. Who created God? One of the attributes of God is the Creator. Obviously, from our religious point of view, He's not created. And that's it. There's nothing. Yeah, there's nothing to argue. Sometimes you just have points of difference. I know how the argument usually goes. You say God is the creator of all things. That's why I say it's silly to say that, try to prove to somebody there's a God by saying, well, who created all this? Because then he'll say, well, who created God? That argument simply will not work with an atheist. They've already rejected the idea of a creator. And so you're getting yourself into pointless arguments. You need to know the mindset of the person you're arguing with. But remember this. At some stage in every atheist's life, that person consciously rejects belief in God.